Welcome to a new series, brand new series, which we are doing in conjunction with our partners at Chayenu. Chayenu is a weekly Torah journal that includes the study sessions for the daily study sessions for Chumash and Tanya and Rambam, as well as many other tracks of study, including a section every week in some Hasidic discourse. So right now, starting this week, the Chayenu will have Kuntras and Yonah Shel Teres HaChasidus. Kuntras and Yonah Shel Teres HaChasidus is often referred to as On the Essence of Chasidus. And we'll be studying just a little bit of it every week over the coming weeks and months. The entire discourse is, I believe, 21 chapters. Some nights we will study one chapter, some nights we will study more. Just a little bit on the background of this kuntras. Kuntras literally means a booklet or a pamphlet. It began as a spoken address, specifically at the Rebbe's Yud Tes Kislev Farbrengen. Yud Tes Kislev is known as the Rosh Hashanah L'Chassidus. It is the anniversary of the liberation from imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, the first Rebbe of Chabad. And every year there is a great celebration on that date. The Rebbe would always lead a Farbrengen, a gathering for Yud Tes Kislev. And on the occasion of Yud Tes Kislev, Tafshin Chav Vav, you're talking about December of 1965. There was a Yud Tes Kislev Farbrengen, and at that Farbrengen, the Rebbe generally, Yud Tes Kislev, would address the theme of what is Chassidus. After all, Yud Tes Kislev is Rosh Hashanah L'Chassidus. So what is Chassidus? What is this innovation? What did it bring to the world? What's necessary about it? What was its significance historically, and what continues to be its significance today? That was always a theme at a Yud Tes Kislev Farbrengen. At this particular Yud Tes Kislev Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke at length and sort of presented what you might call a systematic or a categorized or organized presentation of what exactly is Teres HaChasidus, meaning the teaching. Specifically, I'm saying Teres HaChasidus as opposed to Chassidus, which can mean the way of life of Chassidus, or the movement, or even the culture. But Teres HaChasidus means the teachings of Chassidus. How do we define the teachings of Chassidus? What makes the teachings of Chassidus distinct? What are the hallmarks of the teachings of Chassidus? What defines them? What sets them apart? How would you describe Chassidus or the teachings of Chassidus? I know, I've, in my capacity as a teacher who teaches Chassidus quite often, I've many times had to write a summary of what a class is about. And sometimes very often I'm writing it for people who are not familiar with Chassidus. So there's always that struggle, like, well, do you say it's a class in Chassidus? Well, what is Chassidus? So how do you define Chassidus? So you just say, well, Chassidic teachings. Well, it's sort of, that's translating it, but it's not defining it. It doesn't explain what it means, what it is. I mean, Chassidic teachings isn't any more understandable than saying Chassidus. It's just, using English words, or semi-English. Chassidic, is an adaptation of a Hebrew word to an English word, an anglicized word, and then teachings, I guess, is an English word. But still, what does it mean? Chassidic teachings, okay? But what are the teachings of Chassidus, and how are they different than the teachings of the rest of Torah? And at any rate, that's what this kuntras, this booklet, is about. It takes the Rebbe's Sicha, the Rebbe's address from the Yud Tes Kislev Farbrengen of Tafshin Chavav, and they edited it and they put it into writing and they gave it to the Rebbe for review. Actually, interestingly, the first place where this work appeared printed was in volume 1 of Sefer HaErchen. I don't know how many people are familiar with Sefer HaErchen, but I think actually, technically, people who know Dikduk will probably be cringing right now the way I'm pronouncing it. It's probably Sefer HaRochim, but we all say Sefer HaErchen. Sefer HaErchen is an encyclopedia which was edited, basically compiled, written by the scholar Reb Yoel Kahn, may he be well, one of, if not the greatest student of Chassidus in our generation. So the Kuntrus and Yonah Shel Teres Chassidus appeared the first time it was printed as a supplement to the first volume of Sefer HaErchen. At any rate, without further ado, let's delve into the text. And I want to encourage everybody to use the chat to ask questions. Please, it gives the class sort of a dynamic flow where there's actual reactions and questions. I won't be able to necessarily answer every question or answer it immediately, but I really do appreciate if people do respond in the chat. Now, I understand most people are going to be watching this class on archive and they will not be able to interact, but even if you're watching this on archive, if it's during the time when the class is still being recorded, please email me at rabbi@soulwords.org, rabbi@soulwords.org, and bli neder, if the question fits, we'll work it into the next class, and we'll address it. And I want to mention again that we're doing this in partnership with Chayenu, and that's why if you want to find these classes in archives, you'll find them at soulwords.org/Chayenu. In fact, that's probably how you found this page. If you're not watching it live on the Zoom, you're probably at soulwords.org/Chayenu. Okay, let's jump in. Kuntrus and Yonah Shel Teres Chassidus, a booklet or a pamphlet on the essence of Chassidus, teachings of Chassidus, the essence of the teachings of Chassidus. Banoigeya le'inyona shel Teres Chassidus, regarding what is Chassidus. That's how I'm going to translate inyona, the matter of Chassidus. But maybe it's better to say, what is it? What is Chassidus? V'hachidush sheba, as well as its innovative aspect, al chelkei haTorah shnizgalu lefoneha, over the portions of Torah that were revealed historically prior to it. There's an unspoken question here. The unspoken question is, if Chassidus is indeed so important, so vital, why didn't it come along until so recently? Chassidus is a relatively recent advent. It's really, if you think about it, the Alter Rebbe, who wrote Tanya, you're talking about, lahavdil, it's about as old as the United States of America. Okay, it's not ancient, it's not even medieval, it's fairly modern. It's just, depending how far you want to go back to the Alter Rebbe, you want to go back to the Maggid, all the way back to the Baal Shem Tov, but it's 300 years old, which compared to the tradition, that we have going back to Moses, where you're talking about 3,300 and some years. So Chassidus is relatively new. And the question becomes, why didn't it come along until so recently? And what advantage does it pose over, we have plenty of Torah from through the ages, so what did Chassidus contribute that was new? So regarding this question, what is Chassidus and what's its chiddush? What's its innovative aspect? What did it add? What did it contribute? Nemru biurim rabim, many explanations have been said, umehem, among them being, colon. Okay, and now we're going to have a list of 4 explanations of what is Chassidus and what is innovative about it. These are the 4 suggested answers to this question. And I'm just going to, this is a spoiler alert, but in very soon, not tonight, but in the next class, the Rebbe will say, those are all good, but none of them are the essence of Chassidus. So I'm just giving you a heads up. They're all true, but none of them are the essence of Chassidus. All right. So here we go. Aleph. Bizmane shel ha-Baal Shem Tov hoya ho'elim b'matzav shel hisalfus. In the times of the Baal Shem Tov, the world was in a state of spiritual unconsciousness, or a faint, like somebody who faints. And through the revelation of the Baal Shem Tov as a personality and a leader, as well as his teachings, which are called Teres Chassidus, the world was revived, was awoken from its faint. In other words, the first explanation is sort of a historical explanation. What is the significance of Chassidus? It came along at a critical juncture in history. There was a time where the Jewish people were in peril. There was impending spiritual crisis, as material and spiritual. The situation was there was grinding poverty. There was a great deal of division between different classes of Jews. There were the scholars, and then there were the regular folk, and there was a great divide between them. There was also the Jewish world was still reeling from what until that point had been the biggest genocide of the Jewish people in Eastern Europe, the Gzeres Takvatat, which we're talking about 1648 and 1649. That's just prior to the advent of the Baal Shem Tov. So that wiped out, I believe, a third of Eastern Europe's Jewry, and it was absolutely demoralizing and devastating. Plus, you had the great disillusionment regarding the false Messiah of Shabtai Tzvi, and then the Frankists who followed him. So there were all types of reasons why the Jewish people at the time, right before the Baal Shem Tov emerged on the scene, why the Jewish people were really in peril. And the Baal Shem Tov came and he woke the Jewish people up. When somebody faints, our tradition tells us that the way to revive them is you say their name. A name has a connection to a deeper level of consciousness. So when someone faints, you whisper their name and it revives them. The Jewish people are referred to as Yisrael. Yisrael is the name of the Jewish people. The Baal Shem Tov's name was also Yisrael. So there's a sort of poetry there. Yisrael Baal Shem Tov came to wake up Yisrael, the Jewish people. So that's one explanation. What is the significance of Chassidus? It is this, the teachings of Chassidus came at a critical juncture. They revived the Jewish people. They sort of snapped us out of it so that we would, come to, and we wouldn't, God forbid, succumb to this, comatose state. All right, base. Chosid hu she'ese lifnim mishuras hadin. A chosid is one who goes beyond the letter of the law. So now we're having sort of a more ethical description of what is Teres Chassidus. It is a body of teachings which encourage extra pious or extra scrupulous behavior. And not just extra pious and extra scrupulous, but as we're about to explain, altruistic. Altruistic, meaning self-transcendent. Where do we, as we're going to see, where do we get this idea that a chosid, the name chosid, is one who goes beyond the letter of the law? Like our sages say, it's a Gemara. Sirfan Chasid, one who burns them, his nails, his nail trimmings, is called a Chasid. Af agav shemazikle, even though it damages him. The trimmings of one's nails are damaging to pregnant women. If a pregnant woman steps upon the nails, it's not good. So what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to dispose of the nails so it doesn't cause this damage to a pregnant woman. How should you dispose of them? Well, bury them. You should bury them. Like, with any part of a body that's lost. I mean, the nails aren't really living, but nevertheless, to bury them that would be the best thing to do for yourself. However, somebody who's extra sensitive might say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with that, because if I bury the nails, they still exist. They could turn back up, and a woman could still step on them, and it would damage her. So I don't want that to happen. I want to completely obviate any possibility of damage coming to someone else. So I'm going to burn the nails, then they won't exist anymore. Now, there's a catch. Anytime a part of one's body is burned, it damages the person. How does it damage the person? What's the nature of the damage? That's another discussion. The point is, though, that if you burn your nails, it hurts you. I'm not saying it physically causes pain. I'm saying it causes some type of damage. It's not healthy for you. And that's why it's not required. According to the law, it's sufficient to bury your nail trimmings. You don't have to burn them, because the law is not going to require you to hurt yourself in order to avoid hurting this pregnant woman or her fetus. In other words, she's important, but you're also important. So you don't have to, you don't have to treat her more carefully than you treat yourself. However, and that's the letter of the law. The Chassid says, I'm going to go beyond the letter of the law. I'm going to do something that will damage me in order to avoid even a risk of damaging someone else. And that's the source. It refers to this person who makes that choice as a Chassid. So what is Torah's Chasidus, the teachings of Chasidus? It is a body of teachings that lead one to a level of altruism and self-transcendence where one puts their own concerns secondary to the greater good. Okay, so that's another way of explaining what Chassidus is, all right? So we've had a historical way of explaining it. Chassidus came along at this critical juncture to revive the Jewish people from their comatose state. Now we have the more ethical explanation. Chassidus is a body of teachings which inspires extra sensitive, extra scrupulous, altruistic behavior. All right, let's look now at 3. Gimel. Mailas Chassidus hu sha'koiches hativim naisim koiches elakim. The distinctive quality of the teachings of Chassidus is that one's natural faculties are transformed into godly faculties. Ukamaymer Rabbeinu Azakin, like the Alter Rebbe, Balatanya, the author of the Tanya, says, Balatanya v'Hashulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe is the author of both of the Tanya as well as the Code of Jewish Law. Quote, Kol inyan Chassidus hu l'shanes teva mideisav. The whole inyan, the whole point of Chassidus is to change the nature of one's attributes. This is actually a story. There's a story behind this, and it's in Likutei Diburim, which are sichas of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Tzemach Tzedek, who was the Alter Rebbe's grandson, asked the Alter Rebbe, what is the inyan of Chassidus? And meaning, what's the point? What point is Chassidus driving at? And so the Alter Rebbe answered his grandson, the inyan of Chassidus, the point that Chassidus is driving at, is to change teva midosov, the nature of one's character traits. And the Rebbe makes a diuk. The Rebbe points out here, Loi rak l'shanis midosov hativim elagam teva midosov. Not just to change his natural attributes, but also to change the nature of his attributes. So there are 2 things. There are natural traits. What's a natural trait? It means a trait that you were born with, a trait that you have, you naturally. Nature means that it's native. You were born with it. Literally, that's what it means. So somebody is more, he was born more impatient. So he has to work on that. Or he's born more prone to anger. So he has to work on that, right? Okay, so those are called natural traits. So to work on your natural traits means don't just be who you were born as. Work on yourself and change your character traits. But then there's the nature of character traits. That's much deeper. That means we're talking about the very nature of how character traits operate. You understand the difference? Now we're not talking about the traits of your nature or the traits that are natural to you. We're talking about the nature of traits. What do I mean? There are certain properties of character traits that if you define certain character traits, this is what they are. They are what they are. So, for instance, to give the examples that we were using before, impatience is impatience. Anger is anger. To change the nature of the traits doesn't just mean to change myself and my relationship with those traits. It means to change the way those traits work. By nature, chesed is chesed and gvura is gvura. That's what makes them. That's what makes chesed chesed and that's what makes gvura gvura. They have different natures. So to change the nature of traits means to get in there so deeply that you're actually changing the way the traits function to the extent that they can even work in a manner that is counter to their very nature, to the very aspects that define them. So that's obviously a much deeper level of transformation. At any rate, this is our third explanation of what Chasidus is. It's more about, I'd say, maybe we'll call it emotional development. Okay, so to review, the first explanation is more of the historical. Chasidus came to revive the Jewish people at a critical juncture in history. The second explanation, Chasidus, it's more of the ethical explanation. Chasidus is what teaches you to appreciate being scrupulous to the point of altruism. And then the third explanation we just had here is that Chasidus is about how to master your character traits to the point of even changing the very nature of traits themselves. Okay. Daled, the fourth and final suggestion for what might be the nature of Chasidus or the definition of Chasidus. Teires HaChasidus chidsha, teachings of Chasidus innovated. Asher kol echad ve'echad, that every individual, every one of us, gam mi she'ein lo neshama gavaya, even one who does not have a lofty soul, v'gam lo zikech es atzmai, and even one who hasn't refined himself. See, those are two different things. A person could have a lofty soul. That means he's just naturally more spiritually sensitive. Then there could be somebody, he doesn't have a lofty soul, but he put in the work and he became spiritually sensitive. Chassidus innovated that everyone, even if they weren't given a natural talent for spiritual sensitivity, and even if they haven't acquired spiritual sensitivity, even if they're just regular people like us, yuchul lahasig elokus, they will be able to understand godliness. Abstract concepts in general are challenging. But elokus, godliness, you're talking about, infinity, first of all. So infinity is something we can't wrap our minds around. And then just God is unknowable. So what language is there for discussing godliness? So it used to be, the regular people, they didn't have a language for connecting to the idea of godliness. It was, and now you could have faith, of course you could have faith, but faith is a totally different matter, isn't it? Faith means I can't explain it. But hasaga means, no, I could explain to you what it is. I could speak about it intelligently. Before Chasidus, it wasn't possible for most people. But Chasidus innovated that regular people can discuss godliness. It gave us a language, in other words. Ki al yedei zeh sheteres hachsidus bira sonyanim shel chelek haseid shebeteira v'keravosam el haseichel b'dugmoyis u'mashalim mikeichis tchunas hanefesh mipsari echzelekah, that through the teachings of Chasidus explaining the secrets of Torah and bringing them near to our intellect by using practical examples from our own human experience, nitna ha'afsharus l'chol echad ve'echad. So this gave the possibility to every individual lahasig gam chelik zeh shebeTorah, to understand even the level of Soid, the esoteric level of Torah. V'loi rak v'haseichel shebenafshe elokis, not only with the intellect of his godly soul. In Tanya we talk about the two souls. The godly soul is a being which obviously relates to godliness because it is godliness. So not only does the person, through Chasidus, understand godliness with the intellect of his godly soul, even his intellectual soul. There's actually a third soul, the intellectual soul. The intellectual soul is a mamutza, is an intermediary between the godly soul and the animal soul. Very, very quickly, the godly soul thinks about godliness. That's all it cares about, and that's really all it understands. The animal soul thinks about what's good for it. And then you have, in between, you have you call it the diplomat, the nefesh hasichlis, because these two souls aren't going to talk to each other. They don't have a common language. The go-between is the nefesh hasichlis. That's why when we make choices, I don't want to get into a whole discussion about Tanya, but when we make choices, basically the nefesh hasichlis, the intellectual soul, negotiating a deal between the godly soul and the animal soul. Nefesh hasichlis appreciates ideas. So it's more able to appreciate abstraction than the animal soul. The animal soul wants the cake now. The intellectual soul appreciates things like deferring my gratification for a greater cause, ideas. But it's not a godly soul. For instance, delayed gratification. It appreciates that on a philosophical level. It's not looking at that the way a godly soul would look at it. A godly soul would look at it as, is it an opportunity to lose myself in the one or not? It's looking at it in a binary way of, am I connecting to the infinite and losing myself in it, or am I not? And the intellectual soul is more the philosopher. And it's just looking for interesting ideas. So that's the advantage of it, because sometimes what it can do is it can take godliness, which the godly soul appreciates, and it can turn around and it can translate godly ideas into more ideas, philosophical ideas, and then even somehow successfully translate that to the experience of the animal soul, which is concerned with immediate payoff. So at any rate, Chasidus is this language that enables us to understand godliness not only with the intellect of the godly soul, which that wouldn't really be a chiddush anyways, because that's how the godly soul already understands life, but even with the intellectual soul. So the intellectual soul, which automatically understands philosophy, but not necessarily godliness, Chasidus enables the intellectual soul to understand godliness. And even further, we're not done yet, until even Chasidus even can successfully impart an understanding of godliness to the animal soul. Okay, so just to review very quickly. 4 suggestions for what Chasidus is all about and what it innovated. One is the historical explanation. It came along at a moment of crisis and it saved the Jews, and by extension saved the world. The second one is that Chasidus is this ethical system that makes you extra pious and altruistic, and you put others before yourself. The third one is Chasidus is sort of this system for transforming your emotional traits, your character traits, on a very deep level. And the fourth one is that Chasidus is a language for describing the indescribable, for communicating infinite ideas, godly ideas to the animal soul, ultimately, all the way down to the animal soul. So those are the 4 approaches. Somebody asked a question, does the Tanya speak at all of the intellectual soul? Why not? So first of all, I want to recommend everyone on Soul Words, the classes on Tanya. There are a series of classes that go through the 53 chapters of Tanya. I do speak about this over there, that the godly soul and the animal soul are obviously the main characters of Tanya. The intellectual soul is hinted to in a number of places in Tanya, specifically at the end of chapter 2. But a very simple explanation, why does the Tanya not focus on the intellectual soul as a subject unto itself, or even as an explicit subject? Remember I said earlier, when you're choosing between, whenever you're choosing between right and wrong, it's essentially the act of the intellectual soul negotiating or brokering a deal between the godly soul and the animal soul. So if you think about it like this, the Tanya doesn't speak so much about the intellectual soul, because the Tanya is speaking to the intellectual soul. Who's learning Tanya? The intellectual soul. The godly soul doesn't need to learn Tanya. It's already godly. The animal soul can't learn Tanya. It's just, on its own, it can't learn Tanya. But the intellectual soul learns Tanya, and then can even translate it to the animal soul. Okay. Was Chassidus not revealed at Sinai is a question here. All of Torah was revealed at Sinai, right? That's what our sages tell us, that every chidush, every new innovation that will come out was already given to Moshe Rabbeinu from Mount Sinai. So obviously, Chassidus was given at Sinai, and that's why, if you notice here, at the very beginning, there's a word here, maybe I didn't make hay of it, but at the very beginning, what is the innovation of Chassidus over the other parts of the Torah, which were revealed prior to it? It's all about revelation. So all of Torah is there already from day one, right? Like Rabbeinu HaKadosh didn't write down the Mishnah until centuries after Moshe Rabbeinu, but all of the teachings of the Mishnah were there in the original Torah as it was taught by Moshe Rabbeinu. So later advents within Torah are not additions but revelations. So it's very important to use that word, revelation. In other words, it's all there in the code, but it hadn't been yet unpacked. But it still begs the question, okay, but how come earlier things were unpacked or decoded, relatively early in Jewish history? And Chassidus, if it's so important, how come it wasn't, even if you're going to say it was revealed, it was unpacked, it was always there, but it had to be brought to light? Okay, but why wasn't it unpacked or revealed or brought to light until such a relatively recent time? Okay, anything else for now? Okay, good night, and we'll see you all next week for class 2.